What's up, everybody? This is Mario, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Endurance and Mastery. And first, I've got to give a shout out to Sandy, who was one of the 29029 volunteers who was awesome. He brought a ton of energy, and he actually came up to me and said some really nice things about the podcast. And it was one of the first times that I had met somebody who listens to the podcast in person. And it was somebody who was kind of outside of my, inner circle, wasn't just listening because it's friends or family. Sandy was somebody who just really, resonated with the message. And I just wanted to say thank you and wanted to give a shout out to Sandy for listening. And what I want to talk about today is I want to expand on one of the lessons that I talked about yesterday from the 7 tips to Everesting. And if you haven't listened to it yet, go back and listen to that episode because these were 7 tips from Jesse Itzler, the co-founder, of how to successfully complete the Everesting challenge. And then what I did is I turned those 7 tips into questions and tried to apply it to you and your goals. But the last one was finish like a champion. And in Jesse's speech, he talked about his first 100-mile ultra marathon and a story behind it and why that phrase of finish like a champion means so much to him. So I want to talk a little bit about that and bring it back to you. And I'm going to do that right after the trailer. Do you want to complete an endurance event and elevate all areas of your life, but you don't know where to start? Then you're in the right place. Talking Endurance and Mastery is a podcast to help you create a vision and take steps towards your goals and dreams. I'm your coach, Mario Minner. I've completed events like Ironmans and ultramarathons, but I believe the true benefit from endurance events is how they help you become the best version of yourself. Join me as I share stories, lessons, and interview guests to help you apply endurance and mastery principles into every area of your life. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the importance of finishing like a champion. Now, just to set this up, many of you know that my dad was a Hall of Fame high school football coach, and I was always the coach's kid growing up. He coached me in football, in baseball, in basketball, and so being the coach's kid was just always a part of my life. And growing up in that sports environment, that sports community, has really impacted me to this day. And so as a coach, my dad had a number of different sayings. And as I'm saying that, I feel like I should do a separate episode just on all of those sayings. But he really tried to inspire us to become our best, to pursue our passions. And one of the things that I remember that he did is he put a couple of different phrases in our room. And my brother and I, we had these 2 different phrases in our room. And one was play like a champion. And it was right above our door as we were walking out every single day, just like Notre Dame. My dad was a big Notre Dame fan, and we wouldn't actually hit it because I was too short and too small, but I would see it every single day. I would see play like a champion every time I walked out of my room. Then the other one that I remember is he put something that said, "The sky's the limit when your heart is in it." The sky's the limit when your heart is in it. And so instead of play like a champion or sky's the limit, today's phrase is similar to those, but it's finish like a champion. And like I mentioned, Jesse Itzler was the co-founder of 29029. And the night before the event, he gave this speech talking about the 7 tips to Everesting success. And the last one was, whatever you do, finish like a champion. And he told this story of his first 100-mile ultra marathon and how he was just completely gassed. He was absolutely dead mentally, physically. He was really struggling. He had friends who were kind of helping like pace him and almost like carrying him towards the finish line. And it was in the last 20 miles where he had been calculating it, and he thought that he was on mile 83. And as the volunteers were talking to him, they said, "No, sir, like you're on lap 82. You need to do another lap. You need to go back and do another one." And in that, mentally and physically depleted state. He was just pissed at the volunteers, pissed at himself, pissed at the event, pissed at just everything that was happening. And he was just like, he hated everything in that moment. And then as he's in this super negative moment, his friends are like pacing him and almost carrying him. And this elderly man comes up to him and says, "Hey, are you doing the 100-mile race?" And he looks at him and is like, "What do you think I'm doing?" He's like, "Oh, look, if you're doing the 100-mile race, then finish like a champion." And he was just in such a negative mindset, a negative state, that this old man kind of came up and tried to give him this, piece of inspiration, this inspirational line, that it didn't sink in with him at the time. And he ended up finishing that race, kind of being carried and stumbling across the finish line. But that phrase and that gentleman and that story stuck with him for years, he said. If you're going to start something, or if you're going to be in the race, finish like a champion. And it stuck with him for so long that he ended up having to go back, do that race, and finish like a champion again. And so he ended up going back, doing that same race, and really trying to finish strong this whole time. And his point in telling this story was just not to just think about starting, but to think about finishing. And as an entrepreneur, he started 5 or 6 different businesses, or actually, he sold 5 or 6 different businesses that have had successful exits. And I imagine he started just a number of other ones that when people talk to him, everybody, comes up to him and says, "Hey, like, how did you start it? How did you get started?" And he says, "How did you get started? Everybody asked me that. You should ask me, how did I finish it? How do you be successful in it? How do you finish the job?" And his point in telling that story was to help drive home that point for us, that, if you're going to get started with this thing, you need to finish the job. You need to leave it all on the mountain. And he had talked about how an event like this, there's basically two outcomes. Number one, you finish like a champion and you hit your goal. Or number two, you've exhausted every possible option. So, number one, you hit your goal and you finish like a champion. Or number two, you've exhausted every possible option. And, quitting was just not acceptable. You got to go out there and you've got to earn it. And so this whole idea of finish like a champion really resonated with me as I was out on the mountain, as I'm thinking about my goals, and as I'm thinking about this podcast, because I started this podcast all the way back in November of 2020. I set this goal of doing a podcast every single day for a year, and I'm now kind of in the home stretch. I'm in the last mile, essentially, of 100-mile ultra marathon. And what I want to do is I want to finish like a champion. I want to finish these out strong. I want to continue to show up. I want to improve my craft. I want to continue to inspire people. And it's something that I'm thinking about with my podcast. And this is where I just want to bring it back to you. And I want you to think about your goals. So, with whatever your goal is, are you going to finish like a champion? It's just a simple question. With whatever your goal is, are you going to finish like a champion? Are you going to get the job done? And that is just something I want you to think about today as you're listening to this, thinking about your goals, thinking about this year. How are you going to finish out this year? How are you going to finish out this month? Those are the things that I want you to think about. So that's my message for today. It's all around finishing like a champion. And if this is a message that resonates with you, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It's the type of thing that keeps me going, keeps spreading this message, and it will help impact more people. So that's what I have for today. Until next time, I'll talk to y'all later.